Scott Reid, CTV's political commentator. Scott, you've been such a busy man. What a whirlwind of an election. But here you are in the flesh. We're so glad to be reunited with you this morning.
Yeah, Scott, it's great to see you. Yeah, you've been working really hard. You had a birthday last week, so happy belated on air.
Happy belated.
But let's talk about this. The here and now. Mark Carney is the prime minister, the elected prime minister now. Yes. No one can take that away from him. He's in D.C.
Yeah.
How high are the stakes? You've been in these meetings, in your time at the PMO. How high are the stakes? Like, what's going through your mind that must be going through his team's mind?
Well, I can't imagine how dramatically different their meeting today is than the one that I was in the Oval Office with George W. Well, we did not, for example, have to worry about whether or not President Bush, 20 years ago with Prime Minister Martin, would openly muse about annexing Canada. We didn't have to worry about whether he would go off script and say something literally crazy that would force an awkward moment. So, to me, the number one thing for Prime Minister Carney today, he's got to pull off a Goldilocks moment. And what I mean by that is this. You must presume at 11 o'clock when they meet in the Oval Office and they're there and you've got J.D. Vance on the couch and people are thinking back to the way Keir Starmer lay down on the floor like he was a throw rug and the way that Zelensky got, squeezed and bullied. You're thinking, how do I avoid that? And I say Goldilocks because the second that Trump brings up the idea of the 51st state, your response must be hard enough that Canadians hear you reject it, right? But cool enough that it doesn't trigger the president into some kind of insane, spiral out of control rant. And that is not easy. So we're going to have to be watching very carefully, and particularly at 11 o'clock when they're seated in the Oval Office and how Prime Minister Carney manages
Would they be rehearsing all the like debate
scenarios
prep almost? I'm not kidding, but because this is so strange and so out of the ordinary.
Well, look, what you really want to concentrate on is, process is progress in a meeting like this. So can we get a framework for discussing our economic relationship, our security arrangements, NORAD, how we're going to protect the North, how we're going to actually get away from tariffs and towards something more sustaining. But before you get to that, as you guys say, you have to be thinking. Maybe not rehearsing, but certainly thinking and preparing a couple of back pocket comebacks if Trump raises 51st state in your presence. So I think, you're bang on. I suspect they were sitting around with some coffee and tea last night and saying, all right, so if he says it this way, your line is going to be this, and this is how we're going to try to manage that moment. All eyes will be on it. It's a really challenging circumstance with an unpredictable set of characters.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want a repeat of that Zelensky. Oh, my gosh, that was hard to watch.
It's a verb now. People say, don't get Zelensky.
Don't get Zelensky. Okay, speaking of, 51st state to separatism, I do want to focus on this issue with Danielle Smith and kind of endorsing a referendum. I thought we're in that one Canada, elbows up, unity. So it seems kind of a strange thing to bring this up right now. Like, what do you think the fate of her career will be if it does kind of go through?
Well, I think what's driving it, to be honest with you, is you take a look at the history of the party that she leads. They threw out Jason Kenney. Jason Kenney was insufficiently aggressive, insufficiently extreme for the taste of her party. So it may be that separatism is running at 10-15% in Alberta as a sentiment, but it may be running much higher within the caucus and even within the party for her. So she's trying to pander to that group. The challenge, of course, is that the Prime Minister cannot tolerate any of that. He cannot seem to be conceding to some kind of set of demands if the suggestion is, and if you don't do this, we're going to separate. He can't tolerate that. So she actually constrains the political maneuverability of the federal government and the Prime Minister. That being said, Carney's been a cool customer on this stuff. He could have roped Alberta during the campaign. He could have used popular support in Quebec and Ontario for, moving against oil and gas. He did not. And I think he genuinely wants to move on energy infrastructure. He'll concentrate on where they can cooperate, and then we'll sort of see where it goes from there.
Got about 20 seconds. On Carney's demeanor, how much is that going to be an impact on what happens today in the White House? I mean, he seems to be, unmoved a lot of times, right? He's sort of focused and just like straightforward business-like almost.
I think that's critical. His sense of calm and chill, I think, hopefully will diffuse some of the anger and irrationality you get out of President Trump. I think there's another thing, which is that Mark Carney has been someone who has held important posts around the world.
Right.
And President Trump likes to gain the approval of people that he deems to be a big deal. I think he thinks Mark Carney's a big deal, and hopefully that plays to Canada's favor in the psychology of the meeting today.
And yet yesterday he made a comment like, "Oh, I don't even know why they want to meet with us." That nonchalant comment.
Oh, you know, he's always got to be the big dog, right? Everyone's coming to see me. Everyone's on bended knee. Just another world leader. He said, "Just another world leader." They come in here all the time. I open a cupboard and I find the president of France sitting in there. So you know, this is just kind of the trash talk he loves to employ.
So Doug Ford went right off script and basically put the target right on Donald Trump and the meeting happening today. What's your take on what we just heard there from Doug Ford?
Well, we sure were lucky to do that because boy, did he just run smack dab in the middle of the news of the day. And I thought two things are remarkable. One, you hear Premier Ford there saying the things that Mark Carney will not be able to in the polite confines of his meeting today, right? But saying, hey, let's just remember all this tough talk, all this trash talk that comes out of the White House about we don't need Canada and who is this Canadian Prime Minister? I don't care. I barely have the time of day for these guys. Actually, you know what? We have cards in our hand too, and we have cards to play, whether it's uranium, whether it's nickel, whether it's auto manufacturing. So I thought that was an important and welcome point. I'm sure the PMO actually welcomes that, the Prime Minister's office. And then I also thought a little bit of pushback on Danielle Smith, and you raised the question of Western separatism, and him saying, listen, we got no time for that, right? Now, more than ever, with an external threat, we must be united as a nation. And we'll hear, I'm certain, from Mr. Carney something similar, but it won't be as unvarnished as that. It won't be as confrontational as that. And again, I think in terms of almost being a stalking horse for the Prime Minister, very welcome, unadorned, unvarnished language from the Premier of Ontario.
Let me ask you this then, because one thing happened after the G7 when sort of Donald Trump turned on Trudeau because he felt Trudeau turned on him. How precarious is the meeting after the meeting or the news conferences and questions after that in terms of the messaging that goes there? Because Trump sort of ultimately, he may not read a lot, but he hears a lot.
It's such a great point. I actually had a conversation with someone who was at the G7 meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau when that occurred. And one lesson that the foreign policy establishment, one lesson that those around the Prime Minister and advising him and our mission in Washington, one lesson that they learned is that they actually thought that messaging had been said before, had been repeated before, and it was innocuous, and Trump took it as a rocket. So be careful. Don't come out of that meeting and then looking to domestic audience, try to dunk on the rim. You're going to want to play that a bit more carefully. And you know what? That's Carney's manner anyway. He plays his stuff straight, business-like, workman-like. Let's get some progress. Let's start moving things forward. He recognizes that's in our self-interest. So I expect him to stick to that kind of tone.
I feel like this won't be your only appearance on CP24 today, Scott. Appreciate this. Thanks for being here this morning.
Good to see you again, Scott. Thank you so much for that. Take care.